you're going to go and aggregate more and more data inside of your warehouse. And that aggregation, as we've kind of hinted at, it's not like when you pull in your sales data set, you discover more customers. You get more and more context about every customer. You get more and more columns. You get more and more data that you can start to use for things like modeling, for analytics, and so on. And the crawl version is just getting that data ETL'd and cleaned up and integrated in the first place, which is pretty critical, to be honest, because once you can go and stitch that data together once, then you can use it for every application in your company.
I'm thrilled to have our guest today, Peter Bailis, CEO and founder at Sisu Data. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here and chat with you all day.
Great. So before we sort of kick things off, maybe you can, for our listeners today, just talk a bit about Sisu Data, what you guys do, and some of the problems you solve.
Awesome. So Sisu is an analytics platform for cloud scale data, and specifically, folks have brought more and more data into the cloud, integrated it, sitting in warehouses. But the last mile that most people interact with this data, their kind of BI, visualization, dashboarding tools, haven't really changed in the last 20 years. And Sisu actually started as a research project at Stanford, where I was on the faculty when we started Sisu, to basically help people who can really only see in 2 or 3 dimensions make use of the thousands of dimensions they had inside of their warehouse. So Sisu will sit on top of customers' cloud warehouses, help them understand what's going on, why is it happening, and ultimately figure out what to do about it using machine learning to accelerate a lot of the really painful parts of staying on top of why metrics are changing.
That's great. And I think at the end of the day, we see this within our customer base. Everyone has their North Star and where the business needs to go, but really understanding causality, really what is ultimately driving customer behavior or other aspects of the business, really has real subtlety. And sort of the work that you guys are doing is fascinating from my perspective. I think really does represent the future of how data can be harvested. So with that sort of as a context, let's dive into our big question today. Sisu Data, much like Simon Data, is really built for a next generation of sort of data infrastructure and data systems. And today we're going to be talking about the topic around the future of SaaS, the business application, and really how this all fits in to today's cloud-based modern data warehouse. So with that, Peter, maybe you can sort of kick off and talk about some of the advancements you've seen over the recent years. Around the modern data stack, around today's modern infrastructure, and around specifically things that that can be affected today around first-party data, customer data, data that describes the business more broadly that maybe a few years ago were just pretty difficult.
So I think over the last 10 years, especially the last 5 years, we've seen it really breaking down of a lot of silos organizationally inside of most companies. So this is all centered around this idea of the data warehouse, which is a super old concept, 40 plus years old. And historically, the warehouse was very expensive. So data was this expensive, scarce thing. People were pretty cheap relative to the warehouse. And with the shift to the cloud and cheaper compute, cheaper storage, suddenly the warehouse has gotten a lot cheaper and a lot more scalable. And we've seen this kind of rebuilding of the infrastructure stack to make the cloud warehouse the source of integration and increasingly source of truth for everything going inside of the business. So if historically I had my marketing database, my sales database, my product databases, maybe an operational transaction system and a billing warehouse, now it's really cheap to go and pull all this data together and increasingly integrate it. And we've seen really in the last 2-3 years with the shift to remote work and COVID, the adoption of these cloud warehouses, really speed up. But then also people kind of move up the Maslow's hierarchy of data, if you will, from how do I get my data out of these silos to how do I go and integrate this data to now what do I do with all of this data that's no longer just my marketing data in one database or just my sales data in one database, but I have this almost 360 of my business sitting inside of one place where, in theory, anyone inside of my organization has a login, can go and access it.
And from our perspective, we've certainly tracked on very similar things. And when we sort of look at the breadth of tools that are available to build that customer 360 and build really a 360 of the business more broadly, friction in the technology set that enables that is a lot lower than it was even a couple of years back. What's interesting for us and what's fascinating for both of us, and Peter, before the show, we were sort of aligning on sort of where things are heading. when you look at MarTech and business applications more broadly, there's still a lot of systems that really orient data in a very closed loop fashion. It's very compelling to a business stakeholder, to say something like, "Look, Peter, you have your business, you have your data team, and they're doing their thing, but quite frankly, the data is just not ready. It's just not there. Their quality issues, their operational issues. All you have to do is click these buttons, plug this pixel onto your website and install this SDK, and you can just sort of operate independently and freely of really IT in your data systems. And from our perspective, these solutions they work until they don't. And while yes, in the very short term, they can accelerate workflows and accelerate time to value. You really look at the complexity of many modern businesses, they're just limiting. And in particular, if you look at all the data that exists, in the data warehouse and in today's modern data environments, that just isn't collected, in a web or mobile capacity. Like if someone calls into support, if you have any sort of offline presence in store, and if you think about all the complexities around, not just what products people browse as an example, but all the data behind the product, the margin of the product, the category of the product, so the popularity, the quality of the product, whatever it might be that might be interesting for you from an analytical perspective, or from a marketing segmentation perspective, for that matter. Let's find everyone who browsed our top 10 most popular products over the last year. You simply won't be able to do that. And furthermore, beyond this, one of the big trends that we see, or not a big trend, is as businesses invest in their data strategy and data infrastructure, this really is designed to be the source of truth for the business. And as soon as you have a second source of truth for your business, some closed loop system that purports to be able to reconcile revenue off of website behaviors, you suddenly have big problems on your hands. And when you sort of have this drift across systems that you should be having the same data because don't, this becomes super problematic. And Peter, maybe you can sort of speak to this. And I know you had some thoughts around privacy implications, but how that all sort of plays and mix into this.
Yeah, I think what you're describing these closed loop systems is sometimes kind of an on-ramp to getting data into the business. So if I have no instrumentation for marketing or for product or for my mobile, systems that can install the pixel or install one bit in my SDK and start collecting data are very useful. And I can get my dashboards out of the box. I can get a bunch of useful functionality in the box. It's kind of verticalized for one specific function. But if you look at any serious player inside of these closed loop systems across personas and marketing in all its various forms, also looking at product, sales, operations, so on, they're all going into the warehouse now. And it's this realization that the warehouse can take all of this data, so it's no longer a technical constraint. But then this data is just much more valuable when it's blended together. And I think towards a privacy question, it's been striking to see with some of the changes on mobile, with the do not track features that say Apple's rolled out, how much that's affected a lot of the closed loop system people have built around, say, mobile user tracking for things like conversion analytics. Super, super useful to figure out, say, different versions of application, different versions of targeting. How are your customers consuming your application or services based on their phones? If you're solely relying on that data feed, you're basically starting from square one again. And if you can go and integrate that with the information you have about users who are consuming your products and services, who are engaging, who are renewing, who are purchasing more, inviting friends, it's, once you're inside of, say, the product analytics space where you have all of your first party information. For example, we're working with a delivery application on the mobile space. The amount of context you have in, say, a delivery application is just insane around what users are coming in, what they're purchasing, who they're inviting, what coupon codes and so on. That's all first party data that you are capturing inside of your product that is already going to be existing because you're running a business that's being stored in a transactional database somewhere. Suddenly, when you put that inside of your data warehouse and you can stitch it together with all of the other data you have around revenue and the data you may have to do attribution in marketing, all these analyses that if you just had that closed loop marketing only click based approach, which are being fundamentally limited by the platform now in the case of the iPhone, you'd be completely toast. Whereas in some sense, when you look at the product data, you have so many dimensions, you don't even know where to start looking. So I think that the people who are able to go and take that data forward approach and integrate their data are necessarily at a stronger position because they have more places they can go and diagnose all the things talking about how are categories driving this, how is spend. Even if I can't do individual customer level recognition, knowing, for example, what's driving my gross sales week over week and starting to tailor my campaigns and creatives towards those, and even able to correlate things like delivery addresses with high level demographic information. There's so much I can infer as a marketer that doesn't require all of the data that I've now been kind of cut off from as a function of my platform for delivering my app to my consumers, that will never get removed because that's the core product experience. And I think marketing based on the core product experience and the services being consumed is in some sense even better aligned to customer value. Obviously, a lot of challenge in terms of doing the analytics to make that happen, but it's such a powerful value proposition. I think that's why we've seen this acceleration, especially in marketing, towards a more open ecosystem, or at least towards more consolidated data platform, especially in these cloud warehouses.
Yeah, 100%. And really, when I sort of look at the trends and where the center of gravity lives, a couple stats come to mind. Last year, data volumes in the cloud data warehouse increased by 53%. VC investments into data infrastructure was topped $30 billion. If you look at sort of any category of SaaS or sort of back-end technologies, really, this is a dominating force. So when I look at where things are heading and really where the bets need to be placed, and when I sort of talk to our customers, and certainly for the listeners on our podcast, I think it's really the guiding principle that I always push folks towards is make sure you understand your data strategy. Make sure you understand who the stakeholders are, what the technology looks like today, what the capabilities are, and more importantly, make sure you understand where everything is heading and be part of the conversation. I think this is really a root cause of some of the challenges we're seeing around adoption, across current SaaS applications is if people aren't taking the time to really look over on the other side of the business and really just seeing this explosive growth and explosive immersion of a new set of capabilities, that really, in some sense, represent the path forward for every single brand out there. Yeah, so let's sort of talk about brass tacks for a minute. How does this all come together? Rather, everything from high visibility categories like reverse ETL, to the future of SaaS, and really, what does a cloud data warehouse look like in Snowflake? For that matter, 2, 3, 5, 10 years out. What's your take on this, Peter?
So there's definitely a bit of a crawl, walk, run in terms of the evolution that we see in the market. And there's some constants throughout this. So the crawl version of this is very simple, right? You're going to go and aggregate more and more data inside of your warehouse. And that aggregation, as we've kind of hinted at, it's not like when you pull in your sales data set, you discover more customers. You get more and more context about every customer. You get more and more columns. You get more and more data that you can start to use for things like modeling, for analytics, and so on. And the crawl version is just getting that data ETL'd and cleaned up and integrated in the first place, which is pretty critical, to be honest, because once you can go and stitch that data together once, then you can use it for every application in your company, from analytics to machine learning to operational, customer interactions. And I see in the kind of current state of affairs where you've got essentially, your Salesforce and your customer service applications on top of this idea of kind of reverse ETL says, I'm going to take that clean data, I'm going to pull in the field that I wouldn't otherwise have in my customer service tool, or wouldn't otherwise have on my sales force, and I'll just pump them back in, right? And there's this kind of talk about a different form of closed loop. It's like operational analytics tools or reverse ETL kind of pump the data out, and then there's a bunch of tools to pump the data in, and then there's a bunch of cleaning that happen in between. So it's a little bit just kind of getting the pipes hooked up a bit today. The next step, which is kind of an obvious one when you then look at the data, is what do we do with all of this stuff? Other than just pumping new fields, like essentially setting up a very expensive pipeline to go pump my data from say Stripe back into my customer service dashboard, like what new applications can I actually go build on top of this? And what we often find is if you're in a world where you're used to manually going and slicing and dicing or manually hunting and pecking around this data, there's just too much to go and look at. And so we see a new class of kind of analytics tools coming in to help sift through that and make sure people are looking at the right stuff, right? So I define a metric like conversion rate. Want to have tools like Sisu to go and look and figure out, okay, what is changing? Why is it changing? What's new? What's different? And almost like ranking and prioritizing where people go and look. And on top of that, also building out more rich application functionality. So actually thinking about running more complex functions and user-defined logic on top of the warehouse that then, of course, can still be pumped into Zendesk and so on. But it might be instead of just having I now have my Stripe billing ID inside of Zendesk. I can actually say, here are the top 5 customers that this rep should go and look at today based on some propensity of, say, conversion or otherwise, or if they're seeing bad behavior or so on. Much more intelligent. And I think in the fullness of time, you're actually going to go see potentially entire categories of SaaS just being rewritten on top of the warehouse. And the opportunity for the rewrite is not just that it's running on top of Snowflake for vanity purposes, that it's actually much more context rich and context enabled. And so it's actually building new functionality you can't provide today, except in these kind of intermediate layers that are doing a lot of intelligent computation. Because the app is built from day one, thinking about the fact that it doesn't just have your sales data, it has your marketing data, it has your operations data. It doesn't just have your marketing data, it also has your product data, your sales data. And because these APIs and these dominant players are so common, right? There's actually kind of a least common denominator in terms of what, say, product analytics looks like. And I have a notion of dwell time and engagement and so on. And that's like the huge opportunity. I think where you see a $30 billion of infrastructure investment, you'll see the next $30 to $60 billion building these data apps on top of it. That will take a while to come. But for me, the constant in this crawl, walk, run is suddenly, instead of having everyone has access to their own silos, suddenly everyone has access to everything. And the source of truth increasingly becomes the warehouse. So the question is from an application tier, how do I go and use all this context that I've been operating essentially in a vacuum, just in my corner of the business unit inside of my department, as well as thinking about all the data inside my company? And that is, I think, the promise that we're heading towards. I think the grand question we're seeing play out in the market is, beyond the crawl version, just pumping data back, what's the intelligence look like? And then how do you build apps on top of all of this?
Yeah, no, 100%. And the real challenge is in front of us as well. When I sort of look at some of the characteristics of this next generation of SaaS, we sort of break it down into like 3 core competencies. The first is what we call sort of one-to-one data representation. So this is exactly what you're saying, Peter. And whatever data you have in your source of truth in your warehouse, you want to make sure is available, in your application tier for whether it be sort of advanced, causal inference, for what Sisu is doing around understanding your KPIs and your metrics, or whether it's for fine-grained segmentation or personalization in a platform like Simon Data. The second is really one of operations. The modern data warehouse historically, or the cloud data warehouses, certainly, generations before that, weren't typically thought of as operational centers to run your business.
Right.
So really thinking about how do you actually store the data and operate a system that can run 24/7, 365, and real time and all that. And those are real material challenges. Those are very much open questions that we're working through as a platform and working with our partners towards as well. And then the final point is look, if the data warehouse is the source of truth and sort of the center of data moving forward, then really thinking about the application is not just sort of a one-directional destination, but instead a piece in a broader world of data, which includes all the raw bits, which includes the analysis and the algorithms and the machine learning, the predictive, and also includes your third-party data and more. And really just thinking about the broader data ecosystem, or the data supply chain, as Snowflake calls it, for anyone who missed our episode a few weeks back. With Bill Stratton and Tom from Redpoint. Really today, the vast majority of SaaS is data agnostic and is mostly just fed via an API.
Yeah, it's funny because I think we're almost a decade after, maybe even longer, since Mark Andreessen wrote this essay, "Software is Even the World," right? And I think that what he meant by that was you've got all these companies in tech-enabled or software-enabled disruptors. So you have Uber and Lyft and so on. I think what's interesting about that is you had kind of a very narrow application of tech. I'm going to use software to deliver a new app or a new service or so on. But the kind of the internal operations of most companies, with few exceptions, are really still gut instinct and really still not really data enabled at all. And I would claim that with this type of consolidation we're talking about here, there's actually this opportunity where we're going to see internal operations, right? Internally, how people are making decisions change in a very, very big way, due to the decreased friction that has been around forever. Either historically we didn't have the data, then the data was in silos. Now it's kind of in the right place, but not clean. Now it's increasingly clean, and I think that that role of data and decision making, it's like almost a trope. I almost hate saying that as it kind of comes out here. It's actually kind of doable in ways that people don't historically have access to. And from an operational perspective, just like the excuse for not using data to inform something like a weekly business review and marketing, it really is just vanishing. Like every weekly business review should be informed by data today, if it's not already. And even inside of some of the most slow moving companies, right, there's this realization that, hey, we have to go and do this. And part of this is there's competitive pressure, which has always existed. But part of it is it's just gotten so much easier from the infrastructure layer. And I think it's very interesting to think not of data and software as this one thing we apply in one magic part of our application or one magic part of our service. Like we're going to use ML for driver matching or whatever, but suddenly we're going to use ML and the data we have for like every part of our business operations. And especially with the shift to remote work, where we're all doing work digitally anyway, like how data goes and influences the operating cadence of a modern organization, I think is going to change dramatically, provided we can actually go operationalize all of this.
Yeah, 100%. And look, like having managed teams and now running a 100-person plus business, basic human nature is that if something is hard, you're not going to do it. So as the systems evolve and as the data becomes more accessible and as workflows that can leverage data that lives in the data warehouse and beyond become just that much easier and at your fingertips, adoption will track. So you're really excited to see what happens in the years to come.
Yeah, it's kind of stunning, like how much of modern, even like management practices are built in a model where like there's really not a lot of data available, period. And functionally speaking, I mean, you've been around data for a while as well. It's like there hasn't been that much data in most people's fingertips for a long time. And just like imagine that now everyone talks about setting OKRs and KPIs and so on, and having OKRs that aren't just like revenue and P&L every quarter is commonplace. It's common practice. The next 5 to 10 years, especially around data and how data is operationalized inside of companies, I think it's going to change dramatically. And what's considered like good management practices, I think have a high probability of shifting pretty dramatically when suddenly it's so cheap to go and do this stuff, and the friction is so low that there's no excuse otherwise. And that it's subtle, but I imagine if Peter Drucker or Andy Grove were around in like 2025, like I would love to read like the high output management version 2025 based on not just the idea of setting metrics and measuring output, but like actually like here's the stack to go and enable that, because it's going to change pretty dramatically. And the answer that this metric dropped because of seasonality or something someone just pulls out of thin air is like increasingly not going to be a viable excuse.
Yeah, no, that's totally fascinating. I think we'd probably spend another hour talking about how data-driven decision making and the right metrics can really sort of just transform management culture and really just strategy. But with that, I think we are about at the end of our time today. First, Peter, thank you for joining us on our podcast and sharing your wisdom with us. Really, when I sort of reflect back on the broader conversation we've had, it's really one of a fundamental re-questioning around today's world of SaaS applications and really asking what powers them. When we sort of look at where data is heading and sort of the massive bets that so many brands today have made in the cloud data warehouse, I think there's a very compelling case to be made that that if your critical business applications aren't interfacing in a native way with with the modern data warehouse today, and with your core data as a business and your data team more broadly, it's something that you'll definitely want to consider. Sisu is really a great reference of what you can do from an analytical and an inference perspective for applications on top of the data warehouse. And Peter, maybe you can talk, let our listeners know, for anyone who wants to learn more about Sisu Data, where they can go and how they can learn more.
Definitely. So we're online at sisudata.com. Would love to give a demo or walk through the product for anyone who's interested. I think it's a pretty different way of looking at data, especially the super wide data that's available in cloud warehouses. And as a former academic, I have a heavy bias towards showing rather than telling. So would love to let folks take it for a spin if they're interested.
That's great to hear. Also, I'm a reformed academic as well, probably a bit more reformed than you are, Peter, but have the same bias. And thank you, everyone, listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com. We're also digitally available or email us at hello@simondata.